It just doesn't feel right.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Fantrax and Basketball Monster. And today's Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast is also brought to you by Ben McKeown, today's Patreon sponsor. If you want to be like Ben and sponsor the podcast, head to patreon.com/redrock_bball. My name is Josh Lloyd and you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball. You can find me on Instagram at the same, and of course on Facebook at facebook.com/redrockbasketball. The regular season is over. We're waiting for the playoffs to kick off. So in that 2-day lull between those two things happening, what we're going to do in this podcast is we're going to give our NBA awards, a couple of made-up fantasy ones thrown in there as well as give some quick playoff predictions for the first round of the NBA playoffs. And I am joined by the entire Basketball Monster crew. First up, actually, we have got Matt Smith. Matt, welcome.
Josh, how you going?
I'm good. Good to have you back on, Matty. Next up, Kyle McKeown.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Josh.
Good to have you back on, Kyle. And of course, last of all, we have got Greg Ehrenberg. Greg, welcome back.
Thanks, Josh. This is very exciting. This is the first official gathering of the whole Basketball Monster crew.
Yes, it's the first time I've had all four of us on. We had Kyle and Greg were on for the trade deadline show. Obviously, Matt's been on millions of times before, but he was running the Basketball Monster trade deadline chat at that time. We're all here together. We're going to go through and talk about our award picks for the NBA season. Get it done now. Yes, the NBA real awards won't be announced until after the NBA draft at the end of June, so we've got a bit of a time to wait. But while everything is fresh in our memories, we'll go through and give all our award discussion, and then we'll go through and give some quick thoughts on what's happening in the NBA playoffs in the first round. We're 2 days away from that starting, so it's a pretty exciting time to get this the rest of that ugly, disgusting taste of end of regular season basketball out of our mouth, and hopefully some competitive games coming up in that first round across the weekend. So
let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed. I've got a random order of these awards that we're going to go through. So the first one we're going to go through, guys, is we're going to talk about the Defensive Player of the Year. And with all of us, and in general, the consensus for this award is there are three main players who are going to be in contention for this award. And we did our votes for all these awards, excluding the team-based awards. We gave our top 5 players and then tallied up the votes like they do across the NBA. And we all had the same top 3 players, and that is Draymond Green, Kawhi Leonard, and Rudy Gobert. The end result of our voting is that Kawhi came 3rd, Draymond came 2nd, and Rudy Gobert was the winner of our Defensive Player of the Year. Now, oddly enough, Rudy Gobert, out of the 4 of us, only got 1 first place vote. And Greg, that was you. So what made you choose Rudy as the Defensive Player of the Year, considering you're the one who ended up picking the correct winner?
Yeah, well, I think all of them are fine choices. The reason I went with Gobert is pretty simple. It's just because Utah has the best defense of any of those top teams. And I kind of use that as a tiebreaker between those guys. And then part of it was also definitely a bit of a DFS bias on my point, because just any team going against Utah, it's the worst matchup in all of fantasy basketball and all of DFS. So I think that probably skewed me a little bit heavier towards the Stifle Tower.
Yeah, I can totally see that, because Gobert, look, I think he had the number 1 defensive rating in the NBA, number 2 offensive rating, or maybe those two were switched around. So he had a monstrous impact this season. He ended up beating Draymond Green by 1 vote in our awards. Now he came first on your ballot. He was second on mine, on Matt's, on Kyle's. Myself and Kyle had Draymond, and Matt went with Kawhi Leonard, who was the 3rd place guy. So Matt, what made you go with Kawhi over, say, Draymond and Rudy?
Yeah, it's a pretty close call. The Warriors, Spurs, and Jazz all allowed the lowest field goal percentage in the league, and so it's no surprise that these 3 guys are at the top of the awards. I just think that in today's NBA, being that perimeter shooting type of league, that Kawhi is the best perimeter defender in the league. can guard 1 through 4, and just so vital to the Spurs defense and offense as well. But in this respect, their defense. But Gobert's second half of the season in particular was just incredible. I think he was a better player without Derek Favors, but I just think Kawhi getting those big matchups, the Kevin Durant's, LeBron James, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, night after night after night, that was the reason why he was my leading candidate.
I don't think you can argue with it with any of them, and with the majority of awards, I think that's the case. You can't really have too many discussions about saying, "Oh, you're terrible for picking that," because all these are worthy winners. Now, the last couple of guys we had on our ballot, the guy that got the fourth amount of votes was Andre Robertson, which myself and Greg had as our fourth place guy. But Kyle, I want to talk about your fourth place guy, and that's Giannis Antetokounmpo. So no one else had him in our top 5, but what made you're local in Milwaukee, obviously, so you get to see Giannis up close and personal, as opposed to the rest of us who see him just on TV. So what made you put Giannis in there as your number 4 guy?
It probably is, a little bit of bias, but just due to the fact that the Bucks are the team that I probably watch more than anybody else. But it's in doing that, you see how much Giannis is the best rim protector on that team, and we don't have to talk about stats. Like watching him go out and play defense on the perimeter, watching how he can get steals, watching how much he tries to impact the game defensively, and then I don't know why there's not more talk about Giannis being one of the best, and in the defensive player of the year discussion more. I mean, do you guys hear that much? I haven't really heard that much, and I think it's a kind of an obvious thing.
That's why I wanted to bring it up with you, because I hadn't really heard it. And to be honest, when I was looking at it, I didn't really consider Giannis as a guy. But everything that you said, like, yes, he plays good perimeter defense. He protects the rim. It's an absolutely fine choice. Greg, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I was going to add in, which is another thing from a DFS perspective, is that Milwaukee's been ridiculously tough on point guards this year, and Giannis has been a huge reason why. Even though he's not always directly guarding the point guard, I think he's a really good help defender, and he comes over on switches. A lot of times he'll end up defending point guards, and that's one of the reasons that I think this year Utah, Milwaukee, and Washington, I believe, were the 3 toughest teams on limiting production of point guards.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. Obviously John Wall garnered some votes from all of us there in defensive player, not for all of us, from a couple of us in the defensive player of the year as well. Let's move now on to the 6th man of the year. An award which obviously bothered me immensely last season when Jamal Crawford won it, but I think this was our only unanimous. Oh, that's not true. We had 2 unanimous award winners between the 4 of us, and this was one of it, and it was this guy. And to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised that James Johnson was our unanimous 6th man of the year. I've been talking about him for a very, very long time, but he was absolutely incredible because he did everything. When he had to score, he did. When he had to be a distributor, he did. When he had to provide insane level defense, he did. He was tremendous, and he got our first place vote with everyone. I'll go from 3 up to 1 now that I've given away the winner. In 3rd place, it was Eric Gordon, and in 2nd place, we had Andre Iguodala. In fact, all of us had Johnson as number 1 and Iguodala as number 2, and I'm pretty confident. I'm not sure about you guys. I'm pretty confident that the real vote won't go anywhere near this. Greg, what made you go with that Johnson-Iguodala combination above, say, the favourite guys like Gordon and Lou Williams?
Yeah, well, actually, I was the only one who had Lou Williams ahead of Eric Gordon also. But the reason that I had like James Johnson, Iguodala ahead of the Lou Williams, Eric Gordon group was just the defensive contributions, where not only was Johnson great on offense, and even Iguodala, I think, had a career high true shooting percentage this year, but they're also elite defenders, whereas Eric Gordon, I think, had a good defensive year, but isn't the same level defender as those guys. And then Lou Williams is just kind of garbage on defense.
Yeah, he is absolute garbage. The Lou Williams thing, I didn't even have him on my top 5, which a lot of people would find egregiously bad, I guess. But yes, he was leading the Lakers in scoring for that time that he was there. But we sort of saw who he was when he was on a team that was not the second worst team in the NBA, even though the Lakers finished as the third worst team. Like he just wasn't anywhere near as impactful. So the other guys that garnered some votes here, they were sort of spread around. We all had Eric Gordon. Lou Williams was on 2 ballots. Kyle, you didn't have Lou on there as well. You went with Marcus Smart and Joe Johnson ahead of Lou. I like the Smart pick. I wish I had a thought of it myself. What made you pick those 2 guys ahead of Lou Williams?
A lot of it has to do with whenever I was, looking at the selection of guys that you have for the award, you do put it into context of who did they play with, how good was their team, things like that. And Lou Williams was on a crap team playing a lot of minutes earlier this year, and he wasn't really helping them win. So when I looked at it from that perspective and how big of a help I think Joe Johnson is coming off that bench for Utah and helping them get to the playoffs finally and become a 50-win team, I just think that he needs some recognition for that, so I wanted to put him on my ballot over some of the other guys.
Yeah, look, Marcus Smart's a great pick. Joe Johnson never entered my head, but he has been really key for this team, and he provides them with a late game go-to sort of guy outside of Gordon Hayward. Gives them that second option who can hit those big shots as well, which is something they don't really have, and he does provide that. So I like that. Now, Matt, we both had Wilson Chandler as our 5th guy. There was concerns heading into the season, Matt, about Wilson Chandler and his hip. He missed the entirety of last season, but he was a fantastic asset for Denver this season. What was your thoughts on Chandler's performance this year?
Yeah, like Kyle and you guys said, it could have gone anyway. Joe Johnson, Smart, Lou, Wilson, Chandler. There was a number of guys, but just his consistent contribution across the board when he did play. I think he played 70-something games this season, which was really good. But just on James Johnson, yeah, he was incredible. And I think one of the underrated aspects of his game was also his passing. There were games where he'd come out and have 5, 6, 7 assists per game and just sort of bring the ball down the court, do it all. And like Greg said, his defensive numbers as well. So I'm the same with you, Josh. I really fear that he won't win the award, but fingers crossed he does. Otherwise, I don't know. We need to start a James Johnson campaign or something to get him over the line.
I've been campaigning for him for a while. Kyle, James Johnson's passing, that's not something we've really ever seen before apart from this year, or not to this level anyway.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not, but I think we always saw that he had a little bit of a playmaking ability because he could always put the ball on the floor confidently. Yep. It just speaks to, the reason I picked the guy I picked as my number 1 coach is that he puts players in position to be their best selves. I was a little surprised Derek Williams didn't necessarily work in Miami, but at least when he left there, he was like, yo, man, all these guys are like for real OGs, Pat Riley, Eric Spoelstra, they were straight with me. And like that's what guys like James Johnson, that's what they need. They need people who are straight with them and I think it's beautiful everything that we saw out of James Johnson this year. What's coolest to me and one of the reasons why I put him as my number 1 guy for 6th man of the year is that like I love it when there's a 6th man who, regardless of like what team he's on, you feel like he should have been a starter that year. Yep. And James Johnson obviously should have been starting over all the bums on his team, but like regardless of where he played, I feel like he should have been a starter this year based on the way how well he played.
He's also the player that if we had an award player you would least like to get into a fight with. He's clearly number 1 there. He is the most definitely not mucking around guy. If he means business, it's pretty much all over. Matt, who would you have as second as player you wouldn't want to get into a fight with? Unless you've got someone you'd want over Jim Johnson here.
No, I'm not taking on James Johnson with his black belt in karate, I believe. But we saw a bit of a Papagiannis little head wobble the other day when him and was it Alan Williams? Alan Williams and
Dragon Bender,
Marquise Chris Bender. That's it. And then Marquise Chris, he jumped in and he's not one to back down either. But
isn't Zaza Pachulia from like the war-torn nation of Georgia? Like.
This is also a good opportunity for me to mention.
Like, I don't think he's afraid of anything.
Zaza, no. But this is a good opportunity to mention the guy that probably would have been second, who is now never going to play in the NBA again, and that's Nikola Pekovic, who he was done with his ankle. He was a frighteningly large unit who looked like he would just mess with nobody would mess with him. So he is done in the NBA now, according to Tom Thibodeau, that he won't play for the team again, and he's not going to end up on another team. He can't walk because he was just too much of a badass, and his body couldn't sustain that much badassery. Let's move on to actually a quick shout out to Jeff Perry, who's watching live, who's put down all of the Jimmy Johnson lyrics on the page. So Jeff, you're obviously not just listening to the clip I've got here, because you've gone further than that. So congratulations for enjoying a very good song. Let's move on to the Rookie of the Year. This is one that the results were quite astounding to me here, in the fact that we had a tie. Not a co-Rookie of the Year. We had a three-way tie with all our votes. Joel Embiid, Malcolm Brogdon, and Dario Saric all finished equal, because we all had them in our top three, but in different orders, and it ended up with them being tied. I'll give you who each of us voted for the top three. I had Embiid at 1, Brogdon at 2, Saric at 3. Matt, who did you have?
I still say Saric. Is that all right? Saric, Malcolm Brogdon, and then Joel Embiid third.
Greg?
Yeah, I had Embiid 1, Saric 2, and Brogdon 3.
And Kyle?
And I had Brogdon, Saric, and then Embiid.
So they ended up getting the same amount of votes, so they're all ended up tied at the total. Embiid had 2 first place votes, so if there was in sort of tiebreak, which I don't believe there is, then he would get that award. So we ended up all tying. Now, I know my reasoning for Embiid, and I've spoken about it before. Greg's reasoning is the same, because we've had this discussion over on Basketball Monster. Kyle and Matt, I'll start with you, Kyle. Why did you go with Brogdon over? Because you put Embiid third, and so did you, Matt. So what's the reasoning behind that?
Brogdon was the starting point guard that mattered on a playoff team as a rookie, and I think that trumps the other arguments that we have. And I know that a lot of time, whether or not the rookie is on a good team, it doesn't necessarily factor into Rookie of the Year votes or whatever for people, but it did for me, and that's why I picked Brogdon.
I can understand. That's why I put him second for that reason, ahead of Saric. Now, Matt, you had Saric at number 1. So what's your reasoning for taking Dario there at number 1?
Well, first of all, I just have a real issue giving an award to a guy who played 31 games during the season of an 82-game season, and not only played 31 games, but if you take out the bad games, there's probably 27 or 28 good games there. Now, I know your argument's going to be, well, he shouldn't be in the voting at all, but
yes, that is.
The rookie class was so shit that 27 or 28 games of Joel Embiid was still better than Willie Hernan-Gomez, a Marquise Chris, a Jamal Murray, Jaylen Brown, those sort of guys. So that's my issue with giving the award to Embiid, and I really think the NBA need to tighten up their criteria around a lot of the awards, especially with the games played limit. But Saric, for me, his second half of the season in particular, I know once they shut down Embiid and Simmons wasn't coming back and Noel got traded and Okafor was crap, but I agree with Kyle. Like, you can't take anything away from Malcolm Brogdon and his performance across the whole year. But Saric as well. He was only one of 3 rookies with Marquise Chris and Jamal Murray to play all 82 games. So I think for that consistency and then that strong run home, that really gives him the edge for me.
It's hard to argue against any of these guys, but Matt, I'll throw this out to you with Saric. If you're going to talk about Embiid's games and say, he played 31 games and you throw out the crap games, how about you throw out the 55 crap games that Saric played, or the 60 crap games that he played, like when he was terrible through November, December, and January? Does that not play a part of it?
No, yeah, I did. You go back and if you go back and look at their good games,
yep.
Statistically, I'm looking at them, go back through the box scores, they pretty much come out even around sort of 26, 28 games each. So then Dario Saric playing 82 games as opposed to Joel Embiid's 31. That gives him a massive boost in the voting.
Okay, so if that's your reason, that makes total sense. But to me, I would say that Embiid's 28 good games were better than Saric's 28 good games. But that's, I guess, down to a personal preference. Now, Greg, we both had Embiid for the same reasons, as we've discussed plenty of times. But do you want to just give a brief synopsis of your choice of Embiid there at number 1?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, there's not really like a hard set rule of like, this is what the Rookie of the Year is meant to be. There isn't a thing where it's like, he's the most valuable rookie or he's the most valuable rookie over the entire course of the year. But to me, just what Embiid did when he was on the floor was just so much greater than what any other rookie did this year. And to me, I think my favorite stat for Embiid this year is that in his time on the court, Philadelphia was a top 5 offense in the NBA this year. I think they were right in between Memphis and one of the other top defenses. But when he was off the court, they were dead last in the NBA. So that's how impactful he was as a player. Is he's able to transform a team from being the best from being a top defense to being just dead last, total garbage. I mean, a lot of that is because Okafor was his backup for a lot of the year. Yep. But I think that just exemplifies how much he could elevate a team just with his play by himself.
The other guys.
Did any of you guys think about putting Joel Embiid in Defensive Player of the Year?
No.
I didn't. Only because I view Rookie of the Year as more of a kind of mark in history of basketball, where it's like these were the guys of the rookie class who showed the most ability to be a star down the road. Whereas Defensive Player of the Year, I look at it more of which player had the most value on defense for their team. So for that award, I take games played more into consideration. I don't know if that's the right or wrong way to do it, but that's just kind of how I look at it.
Okay, I guess what I was implying there then is that, like, if Embiid had played the whole year, would we be talking about him in the Defensive Player of the Year discussion?
Yes,
potentially, especially if Philadelphia had made
an
the playoffs.
All-NBA discussion. I think he'd be
probably my.
What was that, Greg?
Yeah, I think he'd be my #1 center for the All-NBA team, assuming that he kept up the same level of play, and I think he'd be 4th in my Defensive Player of the Year voting.
The reason I didn't have him in that conversation, and I would if he had played, because the games played did matter, and you could say, yes, I had him at #1 here, but the gap between him and the next guy was large in Rookie of the Year, but between him and the other defensive player candidates, it wasn't quite as big, so then it comes down to more of the, okay, you provided it more over a longer period of time. But say Embiid had been going up against Towns last year, or Wiggins the year before, then I wouldn't have considered him for Rookie of the Year with so few games, but I did, because the level of play of the others was just nowhere near, to me, comparable. Now, the other guys that we had in voting here, Billy Hernangomez came in 4th. 3 of us had him. Kyle did not have Hernangomez in his Rookie of the Year ballot here, and Jamal Murray came in 5th. Now, Kyle, you're the only one who threw Jaylen Brown in there. Is that similar to your Brogdon argument that he was, contributing on a playoff team?
Essentially, and also the fact that the Celtics claimed the first spot in the East. I need to find some way, even if it's small like this, to throw shade at Cleveland for being such a bunch of cucks.
Cool. Let's now move on to the MVP, which is one that's been debated endlessly, infuriatingly, frustratingly. Even that's the same thing as infuriatingly across the NBA landscape and across Twitter. And I'll just say it once more. Whoever wins it, it doesn't matter. They are all worthy recipients. It's not like we're coming out here and giving Lou Williams the MVP, which in some sort of egregious decision, that would happen. Like any of these top 4 candidates, Harden, Westbrook, LeBron, and Kawhi, if any of them win it, it's fine. And there is no clear-cut argument one way or the other. In my opinion, there's no, this guy has to win it. As I was debating with someone the other day, they said, you literally can't make a case for anyone else apart from Westbrook. And I went, mate, I literally can. Like that's the definition of literally. Like I can easily make that case. And if that doesn't come up, then it's no disrespect to any of these other players. Now, our voting, we had LeBron come in 4th, we had Kawhi come in 3rd, and we had Westbrook come in 2nd, and Jim Harden came in at #1, barely getting over the line as our MVP. Myself and Greg, we both voted for Harden. Matt went with Westbrook, and Kyle went with Kawhi. So Matt, we'll start with you. What gave you the Westbrook over Harden leaning here?
Basically, it comes down to this was one of the best statistical seasons we've ever seen. Well, probably we have ever seen. We aren't old enough to see Oscar Robertson's season, but to lead the league in scoring plus average a triple-double was just incredible. And the amount of times that Westbrook put that team on his back, you think of the Mavs game, the Magic game, that big, massive three-pointer he hit against the Nuggets. And he had to do it all for this team. 42 triple-doubles, and the Thunder went 33-9 when he had a triple-double. So when he didn't have a triple-double, they went 13-25. So he had to do everything for this team to get a win. and he did. So incredible season. I can understand arguments for Harden. I was probably on James Harden for 75% of the season, but come the end of the year, those numbers are undeniable in my opinion.
They're obviously fantastic, and I was Harden all season, obviously, as well. But Westbrook really did close the gap as I started looking at stuff. But I still did go with Harden. Now, you said that team, they struggled when he didn't have a triple-double. But part of the argument that, it's not really even part of the argument I had, is we saw that last game, or second last game, where Westbrook didn't play, and it enabled Steven Adams to play a lot better. It enabled Victor Oladipo to really flourish. And, I think that some of that is that those other guys looked worse when they played with Westbrook. Do you think that there's any fairness in that argument?
There's a little bit, but comparing the Rockets to the Thunder, and we'll see this in the first round of the playoffs, the Rockets are a better team, and that's why I gave Daryl Morey my GM of the year, which we'll get to afterwards. But he hired a coach that suited his star player. They brought in pieces that suited the coach and their star player. And like I said before, this league is a three-point shooting league. The Thunder were dead last in three-point percentage. He had no one on the perimeter to pass to. So he had to do it all. James Harden had Ryan Anderson, Trevor Ariza, Eric Gordon, Lou Williams to pass to and surround him and the pieces there. I don't think Russell Westbrook had those pieces to make the make the Thunder the better team and utilise his skill set to its fullest.
I agree that they didn't have the shooters, but I would argue that Steven Adams is better than Clint Capella. I would argue that Victor Oladipo is better than Patrick Beverley, better than Eric Gordon. So I wouldn't say that they are. Yes,
but who's the better team?
It's clearly the Rockets. But the part that we'll never understand or be able to gather out of that is that what makes them the better team? Is Harden making them the better team, or is it those other pieces that are making them the better team? Like, which part of that? And that's part of the discussion. Clearly, the Rockets are the better team. They finished with the better record. But is it because Harden pushed them to become the better team, or is it because the other players are better? And I think that the argument that the Thunder are terrible and they're trash is a load of shit, because they're not. Because, again, if you said to anyone, would you want Steven Adams or Clint Capella, you'd want Adams. Would you want Enes Kanter or Taj Gibson or Ryan Anderson? That's not a wash. I don't think Anderson's that great. I would take those other two guys over him. Oladipo or Eric Gordon. Like, I'd take Oladipo. Yeah, Trevor Ariza or Robertson. I'd take Ariza. But it's not as clear-cut to me as the Thunder are terrible and the Rockets are fantastic. Kyle, now you had Kawhi Leonard as number one. The only one of us that had Kawhi there at number one. I had him fourth. Matt had him third. And Greg had him fourth as well. So you've jumped him up to number one. Is this going back to your focus on wins?
It's not necessarily, I don't want to say it's a focus on wins, but it is okay, that's fine. But to say that, why don't we consider anybody from Golden State?
That's true.
Throughout all of this MVP discussion, nobody wants to consider Kevin Durant, even though, us fantasy players, you go and look at his total 8-cat value for the season, and he's still number 12, total. In playing just, 62 games or something like that. So it's insane the amount of impact he had, even though he was gone. Steph Curry still had a historic season. So when I'm looking at it and I'm saying who deserves MVP, Kawhi Leonard's still the best perimeter defender in the league. He, he's the guy who made LeBron James look over to the scorer table in the finals and go, yeah, F word, that guy's coming back in the game. That's going to affect whether or not we win. And it scared him a little bit, or, at least made him say boo. So Kawhi Leonard, everything that he's become on offense, what he still is on defense, what he can be on defense, none of the other guys in the MVP discussion have the two-way impact that I feel he does. And so the fact that they won 60 games and he is who he is on both sides of the court, I feel like Kawhi deserves the MVP this year. Without question.
Completely understandable. All these arguments, they all make sense.
Sorry, I shouldn't have said without question. That was dumb.
No, that's all right, mate.
Without question was dumb. I mean, obviously, all these guys deserve it from a certain perspective.
Greg, you're the only one of us that didn't have Giannis Antetokounmpo on our ballots. You had Isaiah Thomas in there. I had Giannis at 5. Matt had him at 4. Kyle had him at 5, and Matt threw in Isaiah Thomas over LeBron, which we'll get back to a little bit later. Greg, so what's your reasoning for having Thomas over Antetokounmpo, which is a completely fine decision in itself.
Yeah, just that peak that Isaiah had, I think like December through the beginning of February, was absolutely ridiculous. So his peak it wasn't quite like what Westbrook's peak, it wasn't quite Harden's peak, but his peak this year I think was higher than Antetokounmpo's. I think it was higher than Kawhi's. I think it was even higher than LeBron's this year. I don't think he'll ever do that again. It was the best he'll ever play during his career, but just capturing that brief point of time where every single day people would ask me for DFS, what do you think of Isaiah Thomas tonight? And I would just say, oh, he's going to regress. And then he didn't. And it would just happen every single night. And then eventually he did. But there was this period of time where he was just playing out of his mind and was really carrying the Celtics all by himself.
What he was doing, nobody had ever done before. No one had shot that, I think, 65% true shooting and usage of over 34. And he did it for like 2 months consistently, and it had never been, no one had even come close to those sort of numbers, and he did that. And it was, I was the same as everyone listening to this podcast would know. What do you do with Isaiah? Like, selling. He's not going to be the number 2 player for the rest of the season, and he kept doing it for a month. Eventually he dropped back off, and we saw him come back to be that guy that's a 12 to 20 ranked sort of guy. But the numbers he was putting up was impossible to sustain, but he did it for way longer than I thought that he would do it. Now, Matt, no LeBron on your ballot. What's the thought process there?
Yeah, it's not
nothing, just his big nuts. That is the ballsiest move ever, Matt. Sorry, I'm just so proud of you. I didn't realize you didn't have LeBron on your ballot, and I've been holding that in for the last 5 minutes.
This wasn't about leaving LeBron out. It was about getting Giannis and Isaiah Thomas into my top 5. We talk about historics and record-breaking seasons. Well, Giannis was top 20 in total points, rebounds, steals, and block, the first player ever to do so, and then the 5th player ever to lead his team in all 5 of those cats as well. He was absolutely insane, and in hindsight, maybe I probably should have had him in my Defensive Player of the Year voting as well. And then Greg sort of confirmed my opinion of Isaiah Thomas in his little spiel there, and history will show that the Celtics were the number 1 team in the East. So taking nothing away from LeBron, but Isaiah Thomas, the 28.9 points per game, the leading the league in fourth quarter points, just night after night, like we said, just didn't regress. So I just wanted to get Isaiah Thomas into my voting, and then the fact that they did have a better record than the Cavs means that LeBron had to drop to 6.
Completely understand all your reasoning there. Let's move on to the most improved player award, and let's go with our top 3 here. At number 3 we had Isaiah Thomas come in. At number 2 we had Nikola Jokic, and at number 1 we had Giannis Antetokounmpo. 3 of us, myself, Matt, and Kyle, all had Giannis at number 1. We've talked about him quite a bit there. Greg, you went with Jokic over Antetokounmpo. The reason I didn't go with Jokic, I had him at 2, is just because it was his second season. I thought the guys are meant to improve. He improved obviously a tremendous amount. But what was your thought process as to putting Jokic there at number 1?
Well, number 1, I thought that we all had some kind of bias. Like, I thought there was like an unspoken agreement that we all just had to put Jokic here, which I guess I was wrong about. But I guess one of my other things also is he's had the biggest improvement just in terms of his value from this year to last year of any other player in the league, in my opinion. I have Antetokounmpo second, so it's not like I was discounting him at all. But the other reservation I had was, has Jokic really improved that much, or is it a thing where he just happened to get the minutes? So that was really my only reservation with having Jokic number 1. Was, am I really saying that he's improved a lot, or does he just have more value because the coach finally gave him the minutes that he deserved, which let him show off how good he is? But I mean, he was just so ridiculous this year that, and we liked him so much coming into the year that I think I felt a personal connection towards the Jokic pick.
Yeah, I can understand that. I was very much on the Jokic bandwagon all season, and there's no way that it's a bad pick or anything like that. It's a pretty solid one. The other guy that we all had on our ballots, I think he's the only guy that, apart from Jokic and Antetokounmpo, that we had on our ballots, was Otto Porter. I had him 5th. The rest of you guys all had him 4th. Kyle, with Otto, it was a little bit surprising to see this sort of improvement for him, especially his 3-point shooting. But what did you make of his second half of the season swoon?
Is it because he was injured, or is it because the team just had more options there? I didn't watch enough of them to really dissect the kind of drop off for Porter, but I don't think it's necessarily indicative of like I think he became a really good player this year, and I think he showed that, and I think that's what he'll be going forward.
I was disappointed.
If you don't mind me real quick, I think his drop in minutes, I think, was very directly correlated with when they added Bogdanovich.
Yep.
I think it's a thing where Porter's had so many injuries, particularly hip injuries, for the last couple years, and he had a couple games where he was questionable with hip pointers, and I don't know how healthy he was towards the end of the year, and I think it was just kind of a thing where the Wizards were like, hey, we just traded for Bogdanovich. Let's make sure Porter's healthy for the playoffs, so let's scale his minutes back a little bit and get Bogdanovich in there.
I think that's definitely what started happening. Also, what started happening was Kelly Oubre started playing better, and they started giving more minutes to Oubre. But you're right, that hip thing had him questionable for multiple games. And he didn't miss any games until the last week of the season when he had that back issue. But the hip thing's bothered him all 3 seasons he's had in the NBA, all 4 seasons he's had in the NBA. He's had hip problems, so I understand that. The thing that I was bothered by with Porter this season was his complete lack of usage, despite being the #1 3-point shooter in the NBA in terms of percentage. He would have games where he'd have like 9% usage and take like 4 shots or 5 shots, which just seemed ridiculously low. And I know that Beal and Wall deserve shots, but there were games where Markieff Morris was getting double the amount of shots, that Marcin Gortat was getting double the amount of shots, that spuds like Trey Burke were coming off the bench and having equal or more shots than him. You know, Matt, what did you make of Porter's use by the Wizards at times this season?
Well, he's obviously the third option there behind John Wall and Bradley Beal, and I agree with Greg. I think adding Bogdanovich probably lessened his impact a little bit. But probably the most difficult thing I found with doing these awards is like I said before, the NBA needs some sort of criteria around them. Like I went searching for what is the criteria to be awarded the most valuable player, and I couldn't find anything. If anyone does, then please email it to me. But like, if you Google valuable in the meaning, it says worth a great deal of money. So if we're looking at money, isn't Seth Curry the most valuable because he sells the most jerseys, or is it LeBron James because he brings in the most endorsements? Value, is it Giannis because he's on a $1.9 million contract and he's leading his team in all 5 categories? And then the same with the most improved. Like, I had Miles Turner at 5th. I could have had Karl Anthony Towns there. How much of that is just natural development and familiarization with being in the league? We saw CJ McCollum last year, most improved because he had the biggest spike in minutes. Like, I want some criteria around these awards.
All right, let's start a campaign, Matty. Let's move on to a couple of fantasy-based awards. The Fantasy Steal of the Year. Now, this one, the voting was very tight. Matt, you probably need to campaign to me because I didn't really put any criteria in these awards when we talked about it. But the general idea of it was, picking someone late and getting first-round value, or a significant rise in the value that you got from that player when you drafted them. So we ended up having 5 players gain the majority of the votes. We had Robert Covington and Nikola Jokic finish equal 3rd. We had Rudy Gobert finish equal 2nd, and we had a tie between 2 Wizards players, Otto Porter and Brad Beal, as the winner of the Fantasy Steal of the Year. So, Matt, we'll start with you because you had Beal and Porter as your first and second guy. We've spoken about Porter quite a bit, but I know you've been very much on the Brad Beal hype train for a while. This was finally the year that he actually brought it. He stayed healthy, and not only that, he actually improved what he was doing. So why was he your Fantasy Steal of the Year?
He did both of those things. So I haven't got any ADP data in front of me, but he was likely probably going 65 to 80 range. Hopefully that's a fair range. Had only played 63 and 55 games in the previous 2 seasons. And like you said, not only did he stay healthy and play 78 games this season, but he had career highs in points and assists. Went from 1.93s to 2.93s. Field goal percentage rose from 44.9 to 48.2. So we talk about shooting guards killing your field goal percentage. Bradley Beal was actually a positive in that category. His free throw percentage went from 76 to 82. And at the end of the season, he finished with a better fantasy rank than guys like Gordon Hayward and Clay Thompson. So he was phenomenal for that mid-round pick, and that's where you really need to get those guys who jump up into the top 40 or 50 to have a strong season.
I completely agree with that. I'm just trying to look up his ADP at the moment, and I've got it up now. So where are we? His ADP on Yahoo was 78. So yeah, look, a pretty significant rise in his value this year. He came in as the 30th guy in 8 cat leagues for per game value this season. So a significant rise there for him. Now, Greg, you were the only one of us that had Anthony Davis, and you had him as number 1. Now, like myself, you've been very vociferous in terms of supporting Anthony Davis and trying to beat down narratives and talking about. Look, we had arguments with people often about this, about people saying, "Oh, if he falls to me in the second round, I won't even take him." Let's hear your Anthony Davis summation.
Yeah, well, first he played 75 games this year, which I think, as much as we were all about Davis going into the year, I don't think either of us would have confidently said he's going to play 75 games. He missed 0 playoff games in the in fantasy playoffs, which I was not as surprised by. But the other thing also is people saying that they wouldn't take him in the second round was completely ridiculous. And I know that he was available at the end of the first round of a lot of drafts. And if you just look at his Z score for 9 cat, he finished tied with Curry as the number 1 total player in 9 cat. And the difference between the number 1 value and the number 12 value, where he was getting picked in a lot of leagues, was a 0.92 Z score versus a 0.5 Z score. And that's a massive difference. Like, that's the same as a first round pick to like a 5th round pick.
Yep.
So if I'm just looking at it, literally the value of him versus where he was drafted, it's a huge difference versus actual draft position.
Yeah, I say that all the time, is that the difference you get between the top 3 or top 4 guys and then the guy at the end of the first round is like the difference between 10 and 50 or 10 and 60. It's such a big difference to get that extra value in. And the guys, between say 40 and 100, they squash up so much. But so getting that extra, doubling of value potentially that you get with Davis there completely makes sense. Now, I think that at the start of the year, I have to go back and check this. I reckon I had him projected at over 70 games and said that I had this feeling that he was going to play over 70. And didn't necessarily think he'd get to 75, but a lot of people called me crazy for doing that. But here we are. He came in as just a ridiculous performer all season. Now, Kyle, Nikola Jokic was your number 1 pick for Fantasy Steal of the Year. What was your reasoning there with that?
Yeah, I looked through a lot of different stuff to try and figure out who to put on this list of 5 guys, and but a lot of it was just in comparison to the ADP data from Yahoo and ESPN, and then considering both what each of these players did on a per game basis, on a total value basis for the whole season. And then I also looked at what they did over the final 2 months to say, okay, for your head-to-head leagues, which is most leagues for fantasy basketball, how impactful were they? And when I looked at that, I said, all right, you were getting for the fantasy playoffs and for most of the season, Jokic ended up being a top 20 guy that you were able to get in the 4th or 5th round. So I just felt like he deserved to be there because of how high his ceiling is.
He finished 19th in 8 cat value, playing under 28 minutes a game, which is ludicrous. Like, the 28 minutes is obviously skewed by the minutes that he played November, December, and some of those foul trouble issues that he had. But in 28 minutes a game, he was a top 20 guy. So he was a guy that I said at the start of the year, if he has 33 minutes a game, he'll probably be a top 15 guy. And I actually ended up underselling that, because if he was getting 33 minutes a game, he was going to be a top 10 guy majority of the time. So he was obviously ridiculous this season. And yeah, look, I didn't even have him in my list of steals. I haven't even talked about who I had number 1. I had Robert Covington as my number 1 guy, because he had an ADP outside the top 100, and he finished 40th in ranking this year. And that all comes with, like Jokic, an absolutely horrendous start to the year where everyone was, drop him, you have to drop him. And my major point with that was, you know what he's not going to do? He's not going to shoot 11% from 3 for the rest of the year. It's going to correct. And if you're telling me that he's killing your field goal percentage, then you drafted him incorrectly, because he was always going to be a negative in field goal percentage. So you can forget the field goal percentage. He's not going to shoot 20%. He's not going to shoot 11% from 3. But what he was bringing you is a shitload of steals. He was bringing you these weird block numbers. He was rebounding the ball and he was getting the minutes, and he was, by a lot of advanced metrics, one of the top perimeter defenders in the entire NBA. So the minutes were going to be there, and when the shot came back around, as we saw it come back around, his value went through the roof, and he finished, despite this start of the year where he was atrocious in shooting the ball, he finished as a top 40 guy. So that's why I had him at number 1. And yeah, I'm a massive Covington fan. I think that he's one of the real successes of what Philadelphia has done over the last couple of years. You can talk about, you drafted Okafor and Noel, but part of the process was getting guys in and seeing what they can deliver. And he is one of those guys, and he really turned into gold for people who did have that foresight to persist with a guy that we knew was never going to continue to shoot 1 out of every 23 pointers and get him in. We knew that eventually it was going to turn around. And turn around it did. Let's go to another fantasy category now and talk about fantasy bust of the year. The third guy that came in on our list here was Chandler Parsons. At number 2, it was Victor Oladipo, and at number 1, it was Derek Favors. I'm the only person who didn't have Favors at 1. I had Parsons at 1. All you 3 guys, Matt, Greg, and Kyle, you all had Favors come in at number 1. Greg, what was it with Favors? Is it just the injury you think that really bothered him, or it looked to me that he just lost a couple of steps, or do you think that was all injury related as well?
I think a lot of it's injury related. He even said, I think he tweeted out like a month ago that wait until you guys see me in the playoffs when I'm finally back to 100%. So to me, that really indicates that his knee was not right at all this year. I also don't think he's going to be 100% in the playoffs. If he is 100% in the playoffs and gets back to what he was before, the Jazz could be a really ridiculous playoff team. But I think a lot of it also is just the emergence of Gobert. I think Favors took a big step back in just his general role on the team because of how much Gobert improved this year. So I think that on offense, Gobert got a lot of the touches that Favors would have gotten. I think Gobert sucked up a lot of the rebounds that Favors would have gotten. So when we just combine that with the fact that Favors was playing on one leg, as he said, for a lot of the year, I don't think that he really ever had the chance to have a great year.
I think what you said there is true as well. Some of that's coaching also, is that he was bothered by the injury, but they at stages were refusing to play them together, and they would play Favors only as the backup center, or really limiting the time that Favors and Gobert shared the court as well, and that limited what he could do along with the knee problems that he was suffering. So that was definitely a part of it. Matt, I'll let you talk about Victor Oladipo because he was second on your ballot behind Favors, the same as Greg had that same 1-2 combination. So what was it about? We had very high hopes about Oladipo heading into this year, that he was going to be absorbing a fair chunk of Kevin Durant's usage, but it just never really turned out for him. What's your take on the entire Oladipo situation?
Well, basically being a fantasy bust, a lot of people were taking him in the second round, which at the time I thought was pretty fair. Given coming across from the Magic to the Thunder, playing next to Westbrook, looked like he was going to have a ton of usage, especially with Westbrook off the court and playing that backup point guard role. And at the end of the season, 67 games, and he was ranked 75th. So, going from that top 20 player to falling outside the top 70, that's a massive drop. So, what would you do with him next year? Do you take him in those mid rounds and hope he comes back up the list and has like a Bradley Beal season, or do you ignore him?
The biggest thing that happened with him this season is we thought that he'd be able to translate a lot of what he did in Orlando and take on some of that Durant and Ibaka usage as well, but that obviously wasn't the case. But what happened was that his defensive numbers just completely disappeared. Like, he was a guy that was getting 0.7, 0.8 blocks a game, like really being a force on that end. He was getting four assists per game, and that fell down to 2.6 assists. It fell down to 0.3 blocks. Because he still scored well. He still shot the ball decently. He averaged 16 points a game. He hit 2 threes a game. He shot at 44.5%, which is not bad as a shooting guard who's hitting that many threes. But the fact that his assists dropped, his steals dropped, and his blocks dropped is really what cost him those 50 spots in rankings. And I talk about it all the time about how those rankings are so compressed. The value difference between the 20th guy and Oladipo at 75, as you said, is 0.6 in Z-score, and the difference between Harden at number 1 and where are we at, and Isaiah Thomas at number 13 is the same difference. So those small things, like the loss of 1.5 assists per game, the loss of half a block a game, the loss of half a steal a game, is what caused him to drop down. And it was just a weird thing, especially that defensive stuff to me that caused him to drop. And it obviously impacted what he was able to do. But the scoring stuff, the 3-pointers, that was all fine. And that was translating across from what he did in Orlando. It's just those other numbers, they just weren't there. Kyle, Reggie Jackson. I was really skeptical about him coming into the season. I was not a big fan of him. He comes in as your number 2 on your fantasy bust of the year. Much like Favors and Parsons, of course, he just wasn't right. The knee just wasn't right. Now, you're a Pistons fan, so you're watching this team and obviously criticizing them a lot more than others. What's your take on Reggie moving forward, and what happened this season with him?
His knee was never right. And I mean, trying to get into the Pistons problems is not something I think we should really do, because honestly, and it's not even a joke. It's like, a lot of it's just psychological. It's not that the talent's not there with this team. It's that there's no leadership from the right places. And then you need to have somebody with, you need confident guys on a team that has SVG as the coach, because he's gonna make you feel like you don't know what you're doing a little bit, or he's gonna, he's kind of a hard driver, or he's this sucks to say as because it's my team, but he's kind of embarrassing with the way he acts on the side of the court, and I just don't think that there's the right mental focus with that team. But as far as Reggie Jackson goes, he was a lot of my picks here for these bust is, where were they taking ADP wise? And people took Reggie Jackson 69th on Yahoo and 60th on ESPN. And he was trash for even when he was playing. He wasn't giving you what you had hoped all season, really. And there was so many games where Ish would play extra minutes and such. So it was just a dumpster fire most of the season.
Reggie finished the season ranked behind Danny Green. He finished the season ranked behind Josh Richardson, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Andre Iguodala. So that just shows you how poor he was. And this is just on per game value. So yeah, he struggled in a pretty significant way. Now, Ben Clark is listening live. He says busted the year was Nikola Mirotic. I would strongly disagree with that. He was drafted 80th and he finished 110th. To me, that's not really a bust when you're talking about late round picks. I've been pretty much on record with how horribly he was used all season, but I don't think that he was anywhere close to bust of the year. Did anyone disagree with me there and think that he should have been included on that?
No, I agree with you. He didn't. He didn't perform as well as I would have thought on draft day, except it wasn't the same drop that these other guys we have that are listed. I mean, there are guys we have listed here that finished ranked below Mirotic that were drafted ahead of him, like Favors.
Yep, Favors. Parsons,
I also think
Jackson.
that there's something about when you're talking about these busts, you're looking at it from a little bit of the perspective of your expectations for them. So, with Aaron Gordon on my bust list, he had the opportunity, even if it wasn't the right opportunity, and even if he wasn't necessarily put in the right position, he had the opportunity to do well, and he didn't do well for a long part of the season, even though he was playing a lot of minutes. With Mirotic, he was screwed over from Hoiberg, and you always knew that there was a possibility of that happening. So, if I'm not shocked by it happening, I'm not going to necessarily say it's a bust. Derek Favors, he came into the season with we're going to limit his minutes, work him up. As soon as he cracked that 30-minute threshold, he played 2 games with over 30 minutes, and then everything just went downhill from there the rest of the season. And then you started hearing there was an article about Derek Favors, how he had to rework his gait, the way that he landed, the way that he ran, so that he wouldn't continue to have knee issues going forward. So from that perspective, I'm kind of terrified. Greg's anecdote about Favors saying he's going to be awesome in the playoffs, we'll wait and see. I hope it happens for his health and for us watching him play basketball going forward, but I'm a little bit skeptical.
Matt, Justin Gutterman, who's watching live, says, do injuries count as busts? Because Jeremy Lin would be pretty high up there. Now, you're the only one of us that had Lin in our fantasy busts of the year. He was great when he played, but he was just injured all season. So obviously you took that as a massive chunk of why that was a bust, just because he wasn't on the court.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, he was probably drafted sort of 50-60 range, and to only get 36 games out of him that hurts. And not only that hurts, but when you could have had probably guys like Jeff Teague or Goran Dragic around him in that similar sort of point guard tier, who then go on to become top 50 players and play the majority of the season, that's a massive kick in the guts. So, and the same with Derek Favors, who didn't play the majority of the season. I think we do have to take injuries into consideration, and that is part of being a bust, like it or not.
Yep. Now, look, Lynn, weirdly enough, Lynn was the 97th ranked or 97th ADP on Yahoo and finished the season per game 62nd. So he outperformed per game value in only 25 minutes a game, but only 36 games for him was a nightmare through that 2-month, 3-month hamstring absence that he has. So in hindsight, I probably should have included him as one of my guys, but I can totally understand why you've got him there, and that is a huge part of it, as you said, Matt. Now let's move on to the waiver wire player of the year. This is a guy that in majority of leagues was available on the waiver wire and ended up giving you the best value. And here we had our second unanimous vote. And of course, it goes to Jimmy Johnson. Once again, we all had him as our number one waiver wire player of the year. He was ridiculous. We've spoken about him plenty. Coming in at third was TJ Warren, and coming in at second was Lou Williams, because nobody expected Lou Williams to really put up the numbers and he was playing at career best levels for that chunk in LA. Let's talk TJ Warren first. Matt, you're a Suns fan. You had TJ Warren as third on your ballot. What do we make of TJ Warren's season? Awesome, weird head injury, bad performances, and then awesome again. Like, what do we make of what actually happens with him moving forward, I guess?
Well, the short answer is we don't know, because the Suns are likely going to have a top 3 pick. We don't know if they're going to keep it, but if they're going to trade it. If they do keep it, do they move Knight? Do they move Bledsoe? If they draft a Jackson, do they move TJ Warren? There's so many unknowns about this team going into the off season, let alone going into next season. So we can't take too much stock about what Devin Booker's done over the second half of the year, about what TJ Warren's done, about what Tyler Ulis has done, because this team will likely look so much different come October, November at the end of the year. So TJ Warren he added that steal, he added that 3 to his game over part of the season. We know he's a scorer, good rebounder, high field goal percentage guy, but he started to show a few other things. They probably should have gone with him at the start of the season over PJ Tucker. So, but like I said, we can't read anything over the last 2 to 3 months, because it's going to be completely different in 4 or 5 months' time.
Agree completely. Who knows what they're going to do if they end up with Josh Jackson? It does obviously impact what TJ Warren can do. Now, Kyle, you had Chris Middleton come in at number 2 here. I assume that's because we're talking about guys that you picked up off the wire and then had a big impact through fantasy playoffs. Is that your reasoning for having Middleton that high?
Pretty much. It's just the fact that there was somebody on the wire in the middle of the year who you could get who was a top 50 guy.
Yep.
On per game basis. And if Middleton, if you were crazy and you just had him sitting in your injured spot all year, cool. But for the most part, we thought Middleton was going to be out the whole season, like especially through close to through the fantasy playoffs. So it was just a surprise to me too. In a big way. So I thought it had a pretty huge impact.
Especially when Jabari Parker went down. It's like, okay, the Bucks are done. They're not going to rush Middleton back. We're just not going to see him now. Yeah, he might come back and do the Paul George 6-game cameo through April and work himself back that way. But we didn't think he'd come back. And within like about a week, I don't even, probably wasn't even a week. Like he was playing 33 minutes a night. He was just back in business. Now, he wasn't exactly the same player he was the year before when he was a top 20 fantasy guy. Wasn't quite there. But he was still really, really good. So it is a good pick, and I didn't actually include him in my list, but probably in hindsight, I wish I did. Now, Greg, you had the James Johnson, TJ Warren, Lou Williams as your top 3, which ended up being the top 3 guys that we ended up voting for. With Lou, what did you end up doing with Lou Williams towards the end of the season? Did you think that he was someone who should have remained on rosters when he went to Houston?
Yes, but only because my assumption was that he wasn't going to be as good when Beverly and Gordon were both active. Except if you remember when Houston traded for Lou Williams, at the time, the next day, I think Beverly and Gordon were both questionable. So my thought process was from that point of the year going forward is that they were going to use Lou Williams as kind of like leverage to be able to rest Beverly and Gordon. And especially Gordon's been injured so much throughout the last few years. I just assumed that they were going to give Gordon a lot of rest, which didn't actually end up happening. But Lou Williams found value anyway because he played a lot more minutes and had more usage once Ryan Anderson went down. So he was somebody to hold for me just because of kind of the rest situation and how easy it was for them to find extra minutes and usage for him and hold out some other guys.
Yep, completely understand that. Let's move on to Executive of the Year now. Our top three, Danny Ainge came in at number 3, Bob Myers came in at number 2, and Daryl Morey came in at number 1. Now, Matt, you spoke about Morey earlier on. You had him as your number 1 guy. So I'll ask you, Matt, about Danny Ainge then, because you had him as number 3. What move did you think that it was that Ainge did that put him into the Executive of the Year discussion?
Well, it may not be the move that he did make. It may be the move that he didn't make in trading that what potentially will be the number 1 pick, but signing Al Horford in the off-season. They've just got so many assets there in Isaiah Thomas and Jay Crowder, Avery Bradley, Marcus Smart, now throw in top 3 pick, and they finished top in the East, potentially got the number 1 pick. Like, they're just in an awesome spot. Most of those guys are on decent contracts as well, so it's going to be really interesting to see what the Celtics do over the next 3 or 4 months during that draft and off-season period.
Kyle, are you excited for the Celtics to bring across Ante Zizic and the Dancing Bear Gershon Yabusele?
Oh, definitely the Dancing Bear. That's the next Draymond, man. That's
He's looking good in the D-League.
I haven't watched any of that yet. Now you got me palpitating over here. I'll have to check that out as soon as we get off.
I'll talk about your other guys on the ballot, because you had 2 guys on your ballot up high that others didn't have. You had Dennis Lindsay as number 1, the Jazz GM. Why did you have Dennis so high?
Because they did everything in the offseason. They made no trades. I don't think they waived anybody in the regular season either. They had the same roster the whole year. Yep. So the fact that they did what they did, made the moves they made, and I'm still blown away that they, added George Hill through trades, were able to sign Joe Johnson. That blows my mind. Got Boris Diaw, who just fits so well. I just looked at what they did there, and then the fact that they did it all before the season started, and were the team that they were. It's like he did the best job. He set his team up, and they didn't have to make any moves the rest of the way.
Yeah, that George Hill trade was absolute theft, to be honest. To trade away the number 12 pick, which ended up being Taurean Prince, to get George Hill. Now, Hill has had tremendous trouble staying healthy, as has this entire team, but yeah, look, I go back and look at it. I probably should have had him included on my list. I had Bob Myers at number 1 for the simple fact of getting Kevin Durant and then signing guys like Zaza Pachulia and David West on value contracts. Now, you might say that's easy to do, but the only reason it was easy to do is because he'd built the team in that way to begin with, to players wanted to come there. Greg, you went with Morey 1, Myers number 2. You got any thoughts on why you had Morey number 1? Like, what did you really like about what he did for Houston?
Yeah, I think that what he did to me that was really impressive was, first, the hiring of D'Antoni ended up being awesome for this team. And D'Antoni was somebody who, when they first hired him, I was like, oh, D'Antoni again, yeah, this'll go well, because he's just been such a disaster his last couple runs in the NBA with the Knicks and with the Lakers. But then not only did he bring in D'Antoni, but he was able to sign Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson and just kind of built a team that fit perfectly around James Harden and D'Antoni's system. So they're a team that really, I think, is successful because of their coach and GM more than any other team this year in terms of the leap they made from this year to last year.
Yep, completely makes
sense.
You
just made my argument for Westbrook being MVP.
Why? Because Morey brought in guys to suit the game style.
Yeah. Yep. That's not that hard. You get your coach, you get your star player, you bring in pieces, you play to their strengths, you get a winning combination.
Yeah,
Thanks
I
for
wish
that, Greg.
I wish the Knicks would do that.
So speaking of the Knicks, Greg, you didn't consider
Matt, so when your interview with the Orlando Magic?
Oh,
Well, they've got Josh and I. They've brought in Matt Lloyd, so they've got the best of both worlds.
I woke up to all these tweets today saying like there's another Lloyd. Like, what's going on here? Then I realised that the Magic had fired Hennigan and hired this guy Matt Lloyd, and I just had multiple people just tweeting it like Mark Stein. They should have hired Josh Lloyd. Or like, what's going on here? Like, was I in the running for something that I didn't know about? Now, Greg, I wanted to talk. You didn't consider Phil Jackson for Executive of the Year?
I did for a split second, and then I went against it because we could do an entire podcast where all of us just rant against our favorite teams, because I know you're not happy with the Bulls, I'm not happy with the Knicks, and we already got a little bit of Kyle definitely not happy with the Pistons. I mean, we just have such shitty organizations that we're fans of, and I think there's a pretty good chance that Phil will be gone in the offseason because the Knicks are just such a shit show.
They picked up his option.
Did they
Right?
do it? Did they do it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw that on Reddit. I'm pretty sure I saw on Reddit.
I didn't see that.
I mean, I might be mistaken. It was my day off. I went down and had Bloody Marys for breakfast. So, but yeah, no, I'm pretty sure they picked up his option for next year.
Well, but
awesome! I can't wait for another full year of the new. Talking about the triangle offense.
It was a mutual option, so they both had the option to. I think don't they both have to pick it up? I'm sure Phil will, but they both have to say yes to it. That's what my understandings of that option was. But we're getting a little bit far down the minutia rabbit hole here. Let's talk Coach of the Year for our last individual award of the show. At number 3, we had Eric Spoelstra. At number 2, we had Mike D'Antoni. At number 1, we had Greg Popovich. Now, I'm the only person who voted Popovich at number 1. Matt, Greg, and Kyle all had Popovich at number 2, so I'll give you my reasoning of why Popovich is at number 1. Because the team won 60 games. They lost Tim Duncan, and they still had an awesome defense with bringing Pau Gasol and David Lean. And to me, that deserves credit. The fact that Tony Parker is your team's point guard and he's really not good at all anymore. The fact that he has developed Kawhi Leonard and changed his game plan and Popovich does this all the time. He is not a guy like Phil Jackson who is married to a certain style. Popovich will go all defense. He will go all offense. He will go to no isolation and heavy ball use. And then when he's got a player who can do it ISO style, he'll give it to Kawhi and let him do that. He'll develop defensive schemes to work around guys like Gasol, to work around guys like David Lee, to work around guys like Tony Parker who are bad. And he's developing all that stuff to enable the team to still somehow win 60 games even after losing Tim Duncan. To me, is an incredible achievement. So that's why I had him at number 1. Mike and Greg, you both had D'Antoni number 1, but you've spoken about D'Antoni quite a bit already. Kyle, I want to talk to you about Eric Spoelstra at number 1. I had him at 2. We had Greg having him at 3, and Matt left him off completely, which I'll get to you in a second about that. Matt, Kyle, Spoelstra at 1. Let's go.
Rodney McGruder started 65 games.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true. But do you give him?
That's it.
Or do you take away some of his credit because they started at 11-30?
Do I give him credit because of that?
No, do you take away some of the credit because saying, okay, look, they had an amazing run at the second half of the year, but he was also coaching when they were horrendous to start the year.
Yeah, but I think that even what he was doing then was right. He looked at the team that he had and he said, these are the guys we're going with and we're going to try and develop them. But he had Josh Richardson injured. Yep. He had the ball in Justice Winslow's hands, which if I'm a Heat fan, he was doing the right things. They were losing games, but he was doing the right things, trying to develop certain players. At that point in time, they were looking at Goran Dragic, I believe, as kind of like a transition point guard. They liked having him on the team. If things worked out and he ended up staying and they became good, fine. But for the most part, it felt like guys like Dragic and even potentially Whiteside were kind of just there to be valuable pieces that they could then later trade to make the team that they wanted. Now, obviously, it could go a lot of different ways, but they stumbled into being a good team, and the pieces fitting, and Waiters having an amazing season, and all these random guys just playing great under Spoelstra, and just with the way that they finished in the second half of the season, I didn't see a way not to. Nobody else impressed me the way that he did this season.
Completely fair. Now, Matt, you didn't have Spoelstra on there, but I'll talk about Steve Kerr. Weirdly, you are the only person that had Steve Kerr on their Coach of the Year ballot, which, when looking back on it, it's probably a massive oversight on at least my part. Did you take something away from Spoelstra because they didn't make the playoffs, or you just thought that Stevens, Brooks, and Steve Kerr were superior coaches this year?
No, well, at the end of the day, the Heat didn't make the playoffs.
Yep,
so I had to give Steve Kerr my vote. I was at 66 or 67 wins this season, and Durant missed 20 games or whatever it was. And I know the Heat got smashed with injuries, but they still had a very good point guard. They've got one of the better young players with Josh Richardson. They had the sixth man of the year, and they had one of the premier defensive centers in the league. And yeah, like I said, they still didn't make playoffs. So that's why I had to leave him off my votes.
Completely understandable. I like the arguments. Now, Greg, your ballot was fine. Mike D'Antoni at number 1, Greg Popovich at number 2, Eric Spoelstra at number 3, Brad Stevens at number 4. And then we get to your 5th pick, which was actually shared by Kyle, and you had Jason Kidd at number 5. And people know my thoughts on Jason Kidd, so I want to hear your thoughts on Jason Kidd as your number 5 in the Coach of the Year race.
Sure. Well, first I'm going to have to address the number one knock against him is going to be his rotations. So I think all coaches have strengths and weaknesses. The way that Jason Kidd manages his rotations and some of the players he chooses to play in certain situations is a definite negative for him. It's not something that he's particularly strong at. But I think that tends to be overblown in whose dog is that?
Sorry.
Okay. I think that Kidd, who he chooses to play in his rotations, I think it's overblown as a negative in the fantasy community, because it's very frustrating as a fantasy player when you have guys who are really good per minute players that don't play as many minutes as you would like. And I do get that point, and I do knock him down for that. But then I have to consider what Kidd has done really well this year. First, he's had to navigate injuries to Middleton, who missed almost the entire year. He had Parker go down for the second time with a torn ACL injury, which is a pretty devastating injury. And he was able to rally the team and keep them together to not only make a playoff push, but to be a relatively high seed in the East, when a lot of people were saying when Parker first got hurt that the Bucks were done. And not even that they didn't have a chance to make the playoffs. People were saying, oh, they should start tanking for the number 1 pick. So I give Kidd a lot of credit for getting the players to keep playing hard after that injury. And then in addition, I also give Kidd a lot of credit for how he's developed the young players on the Bucks. Parker made big improvements this year. Middleton's been very good the last couple of years. And then, of course, Antetokounmpo has gone from being a really good prospect to being somebody who we're talking about as Defensive Player of the Year, somebody we're talking about as being MVP of the entire league. And I think Kidd gets a lot of credit for how he's developed those players. So I think that when I consider all of those positives, I think they outweigh the negative of he's a bit of a pain in the ass to figure out how many minutes he's going to be playing guys on a night-to-night basis.
I'll say this about Jason Kidd, and I've said lots of things about him. There is no way that he is the worst coach in the league, and people might think that I think that. There is no way that he is that, and everything that you said is correct. He has done a commendable job with a rookie point guard, running Malcolm Brogdon there with those injuries. It's been tremendous. But the other thing I'll say about Kidd is I think that he actually limits what this team can do in certain areas as well, just with some of his man management decisions, not just rotation, but the fact of guys not knowing what their role is on a night-to-night basis, of confusing comments about when we're not playing 3 centers and then for the next 4 games playing 3 centers, and jerking guys in and out, or playing inexplicably 30 minutes of Rashad Vaughn one night and then not playing him the next night, or of consistently going back to John Henson and then working out that it's not working, and then going back to Monroe, then you go on a winning streak, and then going away from it and losing, and then going back to it and winning. Just stuff like that he doesn't seem to necessarily grasp. But everything you've said is fine, and he has improved himself as a coach tremendously. I just think that he also limits what their upper ceiling is from some of the things he makes, and I always liken it to Mark Jackson in Golden State. Jackson got them to the playoffs, but he was, with some of the things that he did and the decisions he made, it was always going to limit what their what their upside was in the end, and that's how I feel about Kid. But he has impressed me at times this year. He has also infuriated me at times. But everything you said about the positives is absolutely 100% correct, and he does deserve credit for that. So I'm not here to bash Jason Kidd completely. I just when there things that need discussing and things that need calling out, then I'll do it. But otherwise, he has not been the worst. He is very, 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 very far from the worst coach in the league. I think Matt, your team might have that honor wrapped up.
Yeah, we've got a lot of things going over there in Phoenix.
Exactly. All right, so that's all the individual awards done now. So what we'll do is talk about our All-NBA teams. We'll start with our All-NBA first team, and we had 4 guys all the same: Westbrook, Harden, LeBron, and Kawhi. And then for the 5th spot, the centers, 3 of us had Anthony Davis as our first team center, and Greg, you had Rudy Gobert. So what was your reasoning, Greg, for putting Gobert over Davis? I think I know what the answer is going to be.
Yeah, it's just going to be that defensive impact. I mean, the Jazz defense was just so ridiculous this year, and Gobert was really good. I actually went back and forth. I switched Davis and Gobert between first and second team a couple of times. So I did think it was something that's really close, but just how good the Jazz were this year, and so much of it was due to Gobert being the anchor of that defense.
Yeah, they were the 2 that I debated with as well. Now, into our second team, we all had Steph Curry on the second team as one of the guards, and we all had Antetokounmpo on the second team as one of our forwards. Myself, Matt, and Greg all had Isaiah Thomas as our second team point guard. Kyle, you differed there, and you went with John Wall. What was your thought process? And there's nothing wrong with it, because Wall had a fantastic season, and we all had Wall on our third team. But you had Wall ahead of Thomas. What's your thought process there?
I just think everything that Wall is on defense makes him... I think he's underrated, and I think he's better than Isaiah Thomas overall. So that's pretty much it.
Yep, completely understand that. Now for the forwards, Kyle, myself, and Matt all had Kevin Durant as our other forward, and Greg went with Jimmy Butler over Durant. Greg, was that a games played thing?
Yeah. If Durant would have played the entire year, then I think there's a pretty good chance I would have had Durant on my first team ahead of LeBron.
Yep.
But just because of the games that Durant missed, I went with Butler and Antetokounmpo over Durant for that forward spot on the second team.
And Kyle, you took Draymond Green as your second team center. Obviously in your mind, he has played enough minutes at center this year. Now, I believe he's played less minutes at center this year than he did last season. Is that correct? Or you don't know?
I would guess so. I have no idea. I might be fudging the technical rules here by putting Draymond at center, but he's one of the best defensive centers in the league, right?
Yep, exactly. So I've got
for the modern NBA.
I've got no. Look, he actually did play more minutes according to Basketball Reference. He played more minutes this year, or a higher percentage of his minutes this year at center than he did last season. So yeah. No problem with you having him there. Now, onto our third team, we only had one player consensus across the All-NBA third team, and that is Karl Anthony Towns. We all had him there. John Wall was across 3 of our third teams. Chris Paul, the major debate here is, I guess, Chris Paul and Damian Lillard. I had Paul, Kyle had Paul, and Greg and Matt had Dame Lillard. Now, Matt, what's your thought process behind having Lillard on there? What gave him the nod over Chris Paul?
I think just again the number of times that he carried those Blazers. We saw at the end of the season there with that massive 59-point game to really secure their playoff spot. Paul missed a bit of time with injuries again, so I do like that longevity planned out the whole season. And yeah, that's basically the reason. I can't fault Chris Paul. I really like him, and he had a really good season, but just decided to go with Damian Lillard.
Yep, completely understand that. We all had, or myself, Matt, and Greg all had Draymond as a third team forward. Greg had Durant, I had Butler. Matt threw in DeMar DeRozan, and Kyle threw in Klay Thompson, players who don't necessarily play that position all the time, but they did play a decent chunk of their minutes there. DeRozan was obviously fantastic, and he was hard for me to leave out. And Kyle, you put Klay in there. What was your thought process with Klay? Because to me, he didn't really even come into my thought process as an All-NBA player this year.
It's I don't want to seem like I'm riding the whole wins thing, but they won 67 games. I kind of wanted to reward that team. because it's a lot more than the, I think, 51 that Toronto won, if I was looking at DeRozan as another possible guy there.
Yep, completely understand that as well.
And I also think Klay Thompson's a better defensive player than DeRozan.
No, I think he's almost no doubt about that. Let's go on to the all-defensive first team. We all had, of course, Kawhi, Draymond, and Rudy Gobert on our teams. 3 of us for the other 2 spots had Patrick Beverley. That was myself, Matt, and Greg. 3 of us had John Wall. That was Matt, Greg, and Kyle. I had Chris Paul on there, and Kyle, you had Yanni on there as well. I think we've talked about all those guys quite a bit, except for maybe Beverley. So Matt, Patrick Beverley, he's a guy that I think gets really underrated by people. So just give us a case of why you put him on there.
Once again, it's just about fit, and they know next to James Harden, they need a strong defensive guard, and they had that with Patrick Beverley. So once again, they were not only playing to James Harden's strengths, but then they were able to fill his biggest weakness with one of the best one of the best guard defenders in the league. So and once again, having that 4th best record in the West, I think that's just that needs to be considered and recognised for not only Beverley but for the Rockets as well.
Yep, that's completely understandable. I had him on my first team as well. On the second team, we had one player who was consistent, and that was Robert Covington. Now, I don't know if Covington is going to get recognised by the official awards, but from memory, he is like a top 3 or top 2 small forward defender in terms of ESPN's defensive real plus minus this season. He has been amazing there, and we all recognised him here, and that's great. I don't know whether he'll end up sticking on that team, but I would hope that he does. We had Andre Robertson on 2 of the teams. We had DeAndre Jordan on 3 of the teams, and then a mixture of other guys: Danny Green, Tony Allen, Jimmy Butler, Chris Paul, Jay Crowder, and Anthony Davis. Now, Kyle, you're the only one who put Davis on the team. Would you say he's improved his defense this season as opposed to other years, or do you think the addition of Cousins helped him concentrate more on his defense towards the end of the year?
There's a bit of a fantasy bend there. It's just the fact that Davis puts up good defensive stats, and then also what he's capable of defensively, whether or not he's always put in a position to be as good as he maybe can be. Look, if you want to say to me, who do you want defending on this singular possession, DeAndre Jordan or Anthony Davis? I'm going to say Anthony Davis. So that's why, and that's just my personal opinion. I'm not like throwing shade at like your guys' choices or anything, but like that's how I make my decision.
Completely fair there.
Let's made it on this situation.
Let's move on to the all-rookie first team, and we had 4 guys consistent across our teams: Brogdon, Embiid, Šarić, and the Blue Arrow, Jamal Murray, across all of our teams. And then I added Willy Hernangomez. Matt had Marquise Chris. Greg had Billy Hernangomez as well, and Kyle had Jaylen Brown. So, Greg, you're a Knicks fan. You would have watched Billy play quite a bit this season, as we all did. It was frustrating to see the way that Hornacek used him at times. But what do you make of Hernangomez moving forward? Do you think that the Hernangomez and Porzingis combination can work together?
Probably not, just because I think that Porzingis long-term is going to be so much more effective as a center than he is a 4. So I think ultimately I would like to see Porzingis be the starting 5 and have Hernangomez come off the bench. But they could definitely play some minutes together. One thing that I like about Willie is that he's a really good rebounder. That's his one elite NBA skill. Yep. And that's really all you needed to be considered for all rookie first team in this class, is to have one elite skill. And I think that you got the nod as being on all rookie first team.
Now I'll throw this out to all of you guys, and because I threw this on Twitter maybe a month or 2 months ago, who is going to be the better Hernangomez brother? Matt, who is going to be the better Hernangomez brother?
Willie.
Greg?
Juancho.
Kyle?
Juancho.
Yep, I'm with Juancho as well. Oddly, it was like that's like a 75% Juancho. I think it was like 75% Billy when I threw it out there on Twitter as well. So interesting to see. But Billy Hernangomez has obviously had the better year this year, but I do think that Juancho is going to get there. Let's talk all rookie second team now. We had one constant across our across our teams, and that is Bud Heald, who was on all of our squads. Kyle, you had Scooter Magruder on there and Domantas Sabonis. Is that just because those guys were starters on teams that were either a playoff team or it's a team that was almost a playoff team in the Heat? You put a huge amount of weight on that, and you got Pat McCaw in there as well, players who contributed to winning, which is a huge part of it as well.
Yep, I figured if they're on winning teams as rookies, actually getting good rotation minutes, they deserved a little bit more, pat on the back than a guy like, say, Tyler Ulis or Yogi Ferrell.
Now, Matt, Tyler Ulis, you've got him on your second team. Any Phoenix bias coming out there?
Yes, a lot. I'm not afraid to admit it. You guys should be ashamed for not having him on your team.
Hey, as long as you're out, because you put Marquise Chris on your first team as well, which I assume is there's a little bit of, and you know what, bias is fine because you would watch Phoenix more. Look, I watch Phoenix a lot. Greg, you watch Phoenix a lot. Kyle, you watch them a lot. But Matt, you would watch them more than us. Like, it's impossible to watch all 82 games of all 30 teams. But if there's a team that you're going to watch all 82 games of, Matt, you're going to watch all 82 games of Phoenix. I probably have a death wish, and I'd want to watch all 82 games of the Chicago Bulls because I enjoy self-suffering. And Greg, you watch the Knicks, and you have a similar self-harm policy. So that's where those biases come in, because you see them, and you see the potential in Ulis. You see what he did. You saw what Chris did. So that's completely understandable to have all that going on. Now, Greg, I'll talk to you. This is our last award before we just give us some quick playoff predictions. Yogi Ferrell. He couldn't cut it with the Nets. He got cut there, made it to the Mavericks. He had some decent games. He also had some terrible ones and got benched towards the year as they moved Seth Curry to point guard. What do you make of Yogi moving forward?
Yeah, well, actually, I got a lot of hate on Basketball Monster a couple months ago when I said that I thought that Yogi Ferrell was going to end up losing his starting point guard job to D. Will, and I didn't think that he was a starting point guard in the league long term. I think more people would agree with me now, but when he was playing really well, it was built on an unsustainable three-point shooting percentage.
Yep.
Like, I think his first game on the Mavs, he shot like 8 of 9 from 3, and everybody was like, whoa, look out, here comes Yogi Ferrell. But it was really, I was like, wait, he shot 8 of 9 from 3 that game, except his final shooting line, he was like 11 of 19 or something. So he was not finishing inside the paint at all. And that was something we saw continue, is that he is a decent three-point shooter, but he doesn't finish around the rim. He's not an elite defender. He's not really a great passer or anything. So I think he has a spot in the league, but he's probably just as a backup point guard or kind of an end-of-the-bench type player. But, I mean, just anybody who was able to start this year and play a decent amount of minutes, I think that was enough to be on the all-rookie second team. This is not a good rookie class.
I'm with you completely unfair, and I can't believe that you were receiving hate for that, because I was saying the exact same thing, that he was never going to be able to sustain what he did against Portland. It was impossible. He's not that good. The Mavericks don't envisage him as a starting point guard of the future, so if you're looking at him in terms of dynasty fantasy value, he's not going to start next year. The Mavericks are going to either get a point guard in free agency, or they're going to draft one, and I can almost not guarantee you, but if Frank Ntilikina is there with a Mavericks pick, they will pick Frank Ntilikina. That's just what they'll do. They'll pick him at pick 8 or 9 or wherever they end up picking. If Ntilikina is around, that's who they will pick, and they don't envisage Yogi as a starting point guard. They envisage him as a JJ Barea's replacement, as that guy who can come in and play 19 minutes, 20 minutes as the backup point guard and be that spark plug, microwave scorer who can distribute the ball, because Barea is not going to be around forever, and that's what they envisage Ferrell as. That they don't think, they're not going into the offseason going, we have got our young point guard here who can develop into a point guard of the future. They don't think that. They've got other options, that they're going to draft one, or they're going to try in free agency to get someone. So that's how I view Yogi Ferrell as well. That is all the awards done, guys. Let's just go through these playoff series and just quickly, who's going to win, how many games, and if you've got a couple of thoughts you want to throw onto those, we will do that. The first one of those is in the East. We'll go with the Eastern Conference first. The Chicago Bulls are going to be battling the Boston Celtics. Let's go, Matt.
I'll take the Celtics still, and my boy Isaiah Thomas.
How many games?
Oh, sorry. 6.
Kyle?
Yeah, I'll go Celtics in 6. What were we naming with the Isaiah Thomas thing? What was that?
He's just going with
No,
his
I'm
boy
just saying
Isaiah.
because I like him and I had him in my.
Oh, okay.
5.
Greg?
I was like, are we naming first round MVP picks?
I'm going to say this. There are a bunch of games in this series being played on TNT. If the Bulls somehow win this series, the TNT thing is real, and it's the most absurd streak in the history of the NBA. If you guys don't know, the Bulls have won 19 games in a row on TNT, and the games are like 3 games against the Cavs, 2 games against the Warriors. It is the most ridiculous thing ever. So I'm going to say Celtics in 5 games, except I want to see the Bulls win just because the games are on TNT.
Now, with that it is a ridiculous streak, but I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm pretty sure I saw Sean Hyken tweeting this today. Is that the TNT record does not include the playoffs, so they have lost TNT games in the playoffs in the past couple of years. So that does not stretch into the playoffs. So we'll see how it goes this year. But it is a ludicrous regular season streak. But I'm pretty sure it doesn't include some playoff losses they've had on TNT. I'm with you, Greg. I will take Boston in 5. Let's move on to the next one, and we're going to talk about the Indiana Pacers and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Let's go through it with the same order. Matt, Indiana, Cleveland.
Cavs in 5.
Kyle.
Cavs in 6.
Greg.
Yeah, I'll say Cavs in 6. I think it's probably one of the more likely series to end in a sweep, except the Cavs do have a lot of letdown games, so I think that the Pacers will be able to win a couple games in the series.
I think Cavs in 5, and I agree with you about the chances of a sweep here. I think there is a chance of that. We saw Cleveland last year sweep Detroit, but it wasn't a comprehensive sweep as much as winning 4 games in a row is not. But every game the Pistons were close, and I could see that sort of thing going down. But in the end, I'm picking the Cavs in 5. Let's go to the 4-5 matchup now, and that is the Atlanta Hawks and the Washington Wizards. Matt.
I'll take the Wizards in 6.
Kyle.
I'll go the Wizards in 7.
Greg.
I'm actually going to say Wizards in 4. The Hawks have just been so terrible lately. They've been so non-competitive in so many games the last couple months.
I'm closer to you, Greg, than I am the others. I'm going Wizards in 5. I think that they could absolutely smash them. Yeah, and the Hawks, look, they've had those weird games against the Cavs, and then they just get smashed by like 30 points or 20 points, and just these weird outcomes. But we'll see if Millsap and Howard really lock in. If Schroeder doesn't have one of his weird sort of meltdown games, they could. But at least all their guys are back healthy now. Bazemore's back, as bad as he is, but at least he's there, and Sefolosha's back, so it'll be interesting. But I'm going Wizards in 5 there as well. The last Eastern Conference battle is the Milwaukee Bucks and the Toronto Raptors. Matt.
I'm sticking with the higher seed again. I'll take the Raptors in 5.
Kyle.
Bucks in 6.
Greg.
I really want to go Bucks, but I'm gonna go. I think the Raptors are more likely to win the series, so I'll say Raptors in 7. Except I think the Bucks are the most likely team in the East to have an upset.
I am going Bucks in 7 as well. So yeah, I don't know. I just the Raptors have been good, but I just do get the feeling that something weird is always going to happen at some stage. I was tossing up whether I go Raptors in 7 or Bucks in 7, but I think this is the one that goes the distance, and I think that the Bucks can get up here in this one. Let's move across to the Western Conference. We'll start with the 4-5, and that is Utah and the Clippers. Matt.
Yeah, for me, this is the closest series in round 1. I'm going to stick with the Clippers, but the Jazz are going to need a healthy George Hill and a hot rod if they're to progress to the second round.
Kyle.
Yeah, I'll go the Clippers in 7. The Jazz got to the playoffs. Now they need to lose in the playoffs to realize what it takes to get further.
Greg.
I'll go Utah in 6.
I am also going Utah in 6. I think that this is assuming that Favors can play 25 a night and Hill can get back to his 30 and Rocket Rodney Hood can play 28 and actually look decent, which he did at times. But if any of those injuries strike, they're in trouble. But if they're healthy, I think they beat the Clippers. Let's move on to the one that I think a lot of people are going to be really keen on watching, and that is Oklahoma City and Houston. Matt.
The Rockets in 5.
Kyle.
Rockets in 6.
Greg.
I'll go Rockets in 5.
I am going Rockets in 6 for that one as well. So we're all picking Houston to advance there. Memphis and San Antonio. I don't reckon there's going to be much debate about these last two. Memphis and San Antonio. Matt.
Let's call this on a sweep. The Spurs in 4.
Kyle.
Same. Spurs 4.
Greg.
Spurs 4.
Yeah, I'll say Spurs in 4.
Yep, so will I. That's a sweep for the Spurs. And the last one is the Golden State Warriors and the Portland Trailblazers. Matt.
Yep, same again. Warriors in 4. Get the brooms out.
Kyle.
Yep.
Greg.
Warriors in 4.
I'll say Warriors in 5. I think Portland will win one game just because the Warriors haven't played a game with everybody back healthy. Since Durant came back, they've rested somebody each game. And I think just if you look at how long it took them to kind of find a rhythm at the beginning of the year, I think that there could be some chemistry and some rhythm issues in the first couple games of the series.
I think that Portland maybe takes game 3, the first one back in Portland, and I think the Warriors win in 5. So that is the end of our playoff discussion, guys. It was a good show, great show. Hopefully you guys, everyone thought it was a great show. Good discussions about all those awards and a quick playoff preview. I'll be back on the playoff start on Saturday, so you'll get a DFS podcast for those games on Saturday. So make sure you're staying tuned to that. You can go follow all these guys. Matt on Twitter at SManSports, Kyle at RotoKyleNBA, and Greg at G Ehrenberg DFS. Anyone got anything that they want to promote or plug or do anything like that? Matt, you got anything interesting coming out?
Yeah, I'm going to have one article coming out in the next week, just wrapping up the season, a few little bits and pieces in there, so look out for that on Basketball Monster, and I promise there won't be any Suns bias in it.
Kyle, you got anything anything you're doing, or you're just chilling now for the rest of the year?
I'm just going to hang out for the summer. Madison's great in the summer, so my parents they've got a kayak that they're bringing for me. That it's my dad's old one, so I'm going to go out and hang out on the lake a lot. But Greg, for all of us somewhat respect Jason Kidd as a coach, people out there who had to listen to Josh tear him down all season, it was awesome to hear you give all those bullet points on why he's not a complete shit coach.
Yeah, I was pretty excited when I looked at the Coach of the Year polls and I saw you had him in the top 5 also, because I absolutely thought it was going to be everybody against me on that one. So it was good to see we're on the same page.
When Josh sent this out, I think the first thing I did was go in there and go into the Coach Awards and throw Jason Kidd up at my number 1 slot, just to kind of throw a dagger at him.
Only one thing in there, you had Kidd at number 1. That was it.
I tweeted Josh. I had tweeted at Josh and said, "You're not going to be happy with me," and he said, "Oh, Jason Kidd on your Coach of the Year poll." So he knew it right away.
I listen to the show every morning when I wake up. I go get my coffee, and when I'm walking down to get my coffee, there's a lot of times where I'm like, essentially, people probably think I'm yelling at my dog indiscriminately, but I'm listening to the podcast, and Josh is either tearing Jason Kidd a new hole or telling me why Devin Booker sucks as he scores 70 points, and I'm just freaking screaming at my dog in the middle of the street. So
you have a dog called Josh?
That's what they think.
Josh, even after the 70-point game, you were still finding ways to dig underneath the nails of Devin Booker and be like, yeah, but he's not that good. I'm like, dude,
he's good.
70 points.
He's good.
I think how many people have done that?
Part of my discussion after that was just to show how much one massive game or how close rankings can be. He jumped from the 95th ranked player to the 60th ranked player for the season based on one game. And one part of my point was, is look how close. So we talk about, oh, this guy's ranked 80th and this guy's ranked 75th. Surely this guy should be higher. It doesn't look. These things are so close and they can swing. Yes, it was a historic game, but he can jump 30 spots based on one game. It shows how close all those guys were pushed in. And there were plenty of times before that Booker had really hurt in your field goal percentage. I think he's going to be really good. But for fantasy, he does have limitations that he can obviously grow on. But that was a fantastic performance. I wasn't hating on him.
Right,
he's like to provide other points of view on things sometimes.
I know, but it's just funny when you get down and you like break it down a lot, and you look at like what Devin Booker produces, well, what his stats are, and then what Bradley Beal's stats are, and the narratives around Bradley Beal, and then the narratives around Devin Booker a lot of time, and it's just like, look at it from the right perspective, like there's because if like I love that when you do your like 2-week update and you say, the rankings I look at always take away the 2 worst categories for a player for head to head or whatever, and like I love that stuff because I feel like that really gives you a greater context of just appreciating the player for what they're good in and not constantly tearing them down.
Exactly, and that's a big part of head-to-head, as we talk about all the time, about look for ways that you can really improve your team as well as not necessarily looking at overall things, because it might not always matter to your team whether you're already a terrible field goal percentage team. If someone shoots terrible from the field, then it doesn't matter. Like a guy like Robert Covington, who people are going, oh, he's killing my field goal percentage. Well, you knew that. You knew that was going to happen. He's never shot over 40%. Same with Ricky Rubio. Oh, he killed my field goal percentage. Cool. Like, you knew that. But just look at all the other things that he does that you can't get anywhere else. And that's always my point on those things. But I think we've been going here long enough. Greg, have you got anything that I know you've got some baseball stuff that you might want to tell people about, the stuff that you're doing, some or potential things, or just to follow you on Twitter to see what's going to be happening for baseball season? Because I do get questions quite a bit about, Josh, where can I find information about baseball DFS?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter. I'm going to be doing stuff for baseball season, and I'll announce it on Twitter when I have everything official. So if you want baseball information, come follow me on Twitter. Or you could be one of the people who follows me for basketball, who's been bothering me for the last couple of weeks and explaining to me why baseball is stupid and I shouldn't be talking about it anymore.
Always good people telling you what you should and shouldn't talk about. All right, guys, thank you for joining on and having our first full Basketball Monster podcast of the season. Good to chat to you guys. We've got a couple of days break now before the playoffs start. I'm pretty excited for that to happen. Kyle, thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Greg, thank you.
Yep, thanks, guys, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime.
We definitely will. And Matt, once more, thank you to you too.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Kyle and Greg, for a great BBM season.
And thank you to everyone
who's
been a subscriber over on Basketball Monster, a listener to this podcast, a subscriber. Don't forget, keep listening to this podcast. Even if you're not listening to it, just keep downloading it. Just keep those numbers pushed up so I can show the people. Go, hey, look at this. Look at all these people who listen, and then they can send me some money to read some ads to keep this thing going and continually improving. We are done. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Eric Spoelstra.